Donald Trump declared Wednesday Liberation Day, announcing the steepest tariffs in almost 100 years on some imports, part of his plan to reshape a global economic system which the president believes has allowed other countries to loot, pillage, rape and plunder the US economy for more than 50 years. Economists and world leaders are all warning this escalation of Trump's trade war will have devastating consequences, with consumers everywhere facing higher prices while increasing the likelihood of a US and global recession this year. Global reaction to these tariffs has been mixed. Some countries looking to negotiate exemptions, while others are talking retaliation. The EU is looking at both. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the tariffs are a major blow to the world economy and adds the EU is ready to negotiate with the White House, but is also ready to safeguard its best interests.
I know that many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us.
Canada and Mexico were exempt from these reciprocal tariffs announced Wednesday, but still they're subject to a 25% tax on goods not covered by the free trade agreement. Here's the Canadian Prime Minister.
We are going to fight these tariffs with countermeasures. We are going to protect our workers, and we are going to build the strongest economy in the G7.
The Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has ruled out retaliation by imposing tariffs on US goods. He says under an existing free trade agreement with the US, there is a mechanism to resolve these kind of disputes.
The administration's tariffs have no basis in logic, and they go against the basis of our two nations partnership. This is not the act of a friend.
Joining us live from Canberra is Richard Denise, Executive Director of the Australia Institute, who's also an economist, author and public policy commentator. Richard, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So even under Donald Trump's own formula for imposing reciprocal tariffs, the Australian Prime Minister points out that a 10% tariff is nonsensical. Here he is.
For Australia, these tariffs are not unexpected, but let me be clear, they are totally unwarranted. President Trump referred to reciprocal tariffs. A reciprocal tariff would be 0, not 10%.
Australia and the US signed a free trade deal about 20 years ago. Now, under that agreement, there are mechanisms to resolve disputes like this. So how will it be resolved under that FTA? And is that one reason why the Prime Minister says there will be no retaliation from Australia?
Look, I think this is a much bigger day for Americans who eat hamburgers than it is for Australia's economy. The reality is we don't export much to the US. The 10% tariff on beef, well, you know, Americans will pay a bit more for our beef and we'll send a bit more beef to countries that aren't the US. So I think the reason the Australian Prime Minister is playing it down is because, you know, in reality, this is very small beer for Australia, much bigger beer for Americans who eat hamburgers. And as to how it will be resolved, well, yes, there are processes in place, but, you know, to be clear, Donald Trump hasn't paid a lot of respect for processes. So whether it gets fixed or not, time will tell.
Okay, so you got my second question there, which is, you know, Australia is one of the few countries which the US has a trade surplus with. Last year, the US imported almost $17 billion worth of Australian goods. As you noted, it's mostly beef. Very good beef, very good tasting beef as well, I might say. Australia imported almost $35 billion worth of American goods. So if this 10% tariff that remains in place, you're saying that there will essentially be no impact or minimal impact on the Australian economy?
A very small impact. Again, much bigger impact on Americans who eat hamburgers. But if there's a small reduction in demand for Australian beef from Americans, Australia is just going to sell beef to other countries. Most of the world isn't going to put a tariff on that beef. If Americans want to pay more for it, that sounds like a them problem, not an us problem.
Good point. The issue, though, is when it comes to recent years and relations with China and Washington, Canberra has relied on Washington as a counter to what has been an increasing adversarial and aggressive China. So does that relationship in any way change because of this now tariffs which are coming from the US? Albanese did say it's not an act of a friend.
Well, I think, again, the problem is more with the US than it is for Australia. I think Australia and the US had grown increasingly close in the last 10 or 20 years. And, obviously America previously seemed to appreciate that proximity. Well, now we've been spurned. We've got a free trade agreement with them that they've ripped up and said they're not so worried about. I'm sure the Australian government and US government are going to continue to work closely on a lot of things, but the US has just shown itself to be an unreliable partner. Is that going to lead to Australians broadening their relationships? Of course it is.
There is a much bigger problem, though, too, when you take the view from 30,000 feet. If these tariffs, especially 54% on Chinese imports, that's not so easy to eat from a Chinese point of view as the beef tariffs in Australia, pardon the pun. But that could have the effect of slowing down the Chinese economy. We could be looking at a global recession. Production in China as well elsewhere in Asia, countries which import a lot of iron ore and other resources from Australia. So there could be a much bigger knock-on effect here down the line.
Oh, look, there's no doubt that Donald Trump starting a trade war with the world is, for economists around the world, agree is bad for the world economy. No one's doubting that. So to the extent that the US trade war with the world slows down the world economy, yes, that will have an impact on Australia's exports of commodities, particularly things like iron ore. But the Australian economy is far more diverse than that. Australia produces a lot and consumes a lot. Exports are part of our economy. Again, what Donald Trump's doing is not good for the world economy. So no one's saying it's going to be good for Australia. But I think, again, it's going to be far worse for Americans who buy things from China, far worse for Americans who buy hamburgers. I think America will probably sort this out amongst themselves. I think Australia and the rest of the world will just sit back and, change their trade to other countries.
Do you think the world has been ripping off the US for the last 50 years?
No, of course not. I mean, trade, no one forces you to trade. That's what trade is. Trade is a voluntary exchange. So the fact that Americans have been choosing to buy beef from Australia rather than choosing to buy beef grown in America suggests that Americans thought Australian beef was either cheaper or better than American beef. No one was holding a gun to the Americans' head saying you have to buy beef from Australia. So the reason America was buying our beef was they wanted to. If they now want to pay more for it, again, that's a them problem, not an Australia problem.
See, very relaxed there, Richard, which is good to see. Richard Denise in Canberra. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.